Okay. And we are live today, February 27. 27? Yes, right. 27, 2023. Um, Welcome to an Afrocentric exploration of the Holy Writings. We are considering Genesis chapter 11, B, as well as Genesis chapter 12. We are considering these texts from the St. James um, tradition of the Bible, an old version that has a lot of annotations and a lot of references that really make a difference in understanding these texts. Today's consideration is very important because it talks about Abraham, and if there is any figure in the patriarchs that we need to pay attention is Abraham, because he is claimed by both main religions, religious group, to, we'll say, the Jewish and religion as well as the Muslim religion. They claim to be coming from Abraham, right? And it is very important to understand this figure and how it all started. This part of the Bible just jumps into that. We saw last time, that was yesterday, because we couldn't do the Friday content. It was just amazing how Nimrod, who is a descendant of Cush, was able to construct an edifice and a city that was very advanced, that threatened the gods, to the point where they came and confused everybody with different languages, because we were speaking one language before. Which language? That's a subject for another day. Now, when it comes to Nimrod, it was just a short passage that was spoken about. He was great. He was really great. Some version says he was a mighty warrior in opposition to God. But in this version, it says it was before God. I don't know why it was changed to opposition to God, because it conveys a certain belligerence between the two parties. But before God, it could be that the respect is still there, but they are doing it at the same time. That rivaled, and the gods were not happy, destroyed that part. For such an important figure, there is just a part of chapter 11 that talks about it. Now we enter in the next part, where they talk about the descendant of Shem as well as the descendant of Japheth. This is this part now. And of course, this is where Abraham came from. And the rest of it is just those two or one patriarch that is discussed along the way. Now, to start the second part of chapter 11, what I observed also is very important, is the ages of the descendants of Shem that are explained. To start with, and this was kind of funny for myself, but because this is a recollection of things that I go through, so I'm going to just put it in there. It says that these are the generation of Shem, right? And Shem lived after he got, before that, Shem was 100-year-old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And then I was like, okay, do the math. The flood, there was 40 days of rain, day and night, and then 150 days that there was water on the surface. Let's say that's another it's almost 200 days. It's more than a year that Shem was in the ark with his wife with nothing else to do, and they didn't have any kids. 2 years after the deluge is when he was able to have a kid, right? A child. To me, that's not a just a detail. It's it's a detail that is important to notice and to see that there are some things that are, kind of questionable about that. But to say the least, let's say everything is okay and we're just reading into it more than we should. When you look at the descendants of Shem now, it goes to say that you will see that, and I observe carefully, like from 12, Arphaxad lived for 35 years, then had a kid. Selah lived 30 years, then had a kid. Eber on 16, that's 11, 15, 16, 34 years, then he had a kid. Then there was Peleg, 30 years, then he had a kid. Roy on 20, 32 years, then he had a kid. Then Serug, 30 years, then he had a kid. Nahor, 29 years, then he had a kid. That's on 24, right? All of these, you see, the age to which they have a kid is about between 29 and 35. It's very close. It's the same period of time that they have these kids. Until Terah. Terah lived 70 years, then had Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. There. Why more than double the average year of, let's say, maturation? When a man has a kid, when a boy has a kid, then you become a man, or something like that. Because not all that have kids. It's another another subject, and I don't want to open that can of worms. In any case, it takes this guy, which is Terah, 70 years before he could have a kid. There is an issue there. If you look, right, it's a double the most that all the other that are cited there will have. 70 years, right? And you can start seeing that something is wrong here, right? But then, to make things a little bit more complicated, what happened is he loses his son Haran. This is the only patriarch who is burying his own son. All the others lived many, many years, then died before their sons, before their daughters. And it is rightly so, because I believe that it's children should bury their parents, not the other way around. Parents should not be burying their children. It's just a catastrophe. And it happens for the first time with the father of Abraham. Why? Was there a disease in their family that got him? Or is it the same disease that explained why he didn't have kids? Why his father didn't have kids until he was 70? Was there any consequence of having kids that old? But to be honest, like the pattern seems to be between 30, 35 years that all these patriarchs were able to have their kids of their own, except when it came to the father of Abraham. And as such, you see another thing, that he loses his son. And the third point is that when you continue, it shows that Abraham himself was with his father until he was 70, 75. That's when God told him to leave his parents and go where he will show him. So this guy, not only did he miss the cut of 35 to have his kid, but also he was still at home with his parents at 75 until there was an intervention to get him out of there. In modern days, if you have a son who is normal by all means and things of that nature, you want them to go out in the world and contend with reality as they mature. You don't want them to be always with you at home. And when that happens, there are epithets that society attributes to people like that. And I don't think it is far from the truth to infer that this was the case for Abraham. Not only wasn't he anybody, but really also he had reached the bottom in society. And from that bottom, he was picked by God at this point, the Lord, on chapter 12, where it says, now the Lord had said unto Abraham, just like that, just popped up and said, get thee out of this country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will shew thee. There is an intervention. And I was thinking about an Afrocentric way of looking at this is it could be something like in your own society, when you see people who are struggling or of no fault of their own or intentionally, it is not a wise thing to count them out because they can be picked to do exactly something that will mean your own demise. So you have to be careful about those ones. And probably you have to bless them, because when here God says, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thee a name great, and thee shall be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. That is a very important thing. Those who are in a position of nothingness, it is probably an opportunity to actually bless them rather than castigate them. And I've seen this in my own lifetime. We had a population, people called the Banyamulenge, and I always say this: our treatment of them was not the most noble way of dealing with them. And I believe that something took them out of that position of being humiliated by life, by environment, by everything, and made something out of it that has become a door for undermining the rest of the country, because the intent was probably not to set the country on fire or waste these many years of lives and time, but it was really to try to get to be someone, because you get oppressed and there is a breaking point where you just say, can't take this anymore. Either that, and it is really important for us to make sure that whenever we are talking of people in those positions, or people who have been oppressed, or genocide, or things of that nature, to be compassionate and bless them. You may feel different about what has happened. You may even blame them for that. But these words are very powerful because it carries a certain energy that to this day it still works. And you can see that all those who have attempted to curse that nation, or the descendant of Abraham, or particular descendant of Abraham, have met a future that, or obstacle that were unsurmountable, and that led to their own demise. So I think it's a message buried deep in this part of the Bible that is telling for us. Now Abraham lives there. The other thing is, like, he leaves, it says he's leaving from Haran. Haran was his brother that was dead and was the father of Lot. So he left there with Lot, who is his nephew, and went on to the land of Canaan. That was the expedition. But then they got to Egypt. They say it's a visit to Egypt. I don't know if it's a visit to Egypt, but it seems like there was hunger, right? And you have to remember this part. There was hunger around where they were, and then they went to Egypt because in Egypt there was abundance. This is the time when Egypt was African, not European, not Arab, or those two, or any other nation. And this, we were, our ancestors had developed a civilization that could contend with those kind of unforeseen occurrences that were plaguing everybody else. And it seems like the only place that was able to accommodate Abraham was Egypt, was Africa. You remember that because later on, this is Abraham, later on, Joseph, also his parents and his brothers, there was a famine. They came where? To Egypt. This is way, way down in the history. But here you see that it started from Abraham, went to Egypt, and he pulls the first one on the Pharaoh. He knew that he had a beautiful wife and that she would be desired, like, any black man who respects himself will see a beautiful woman and wants to inquire what is about this matter. Now, Abraham knew that it will happen, and what he did, he told his wife to tell the Egyptians that it was his sister. So he deceived them. But that deception was catastrophic because the Pharaoh ended up sleeping with Sarah, the wife of Abraham. And there was a plague that was sent to the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh realized that he was sleeping with someone else's wife. And for that matter, because he wanted to make her one of his wives. Two things to unpack there. One, the protection of Africa for the Abrahamic descendants. Two, the fact that in ancient Africa, incest was not something allowed. And Abraham knew it. He knew that this law prevented them from doing any harm to me because they did not have the custom of bearing children with their own sisters. So that debunks the story of Cleopatra and all those kind of things that the Cleopatra that we know is a European Cleopatra. It was not in ancient Africa because she slept probably with every member of her family. And her children had grandfathers that were cousins and things. It was just a mess. So here these texts show that incest was not something, it was something that was practiced by other nations, but not our ancestors. The third thing is that you remember we were talking about wife, because a wife is really the person that protects spiritually and in all means the purpose that is bestowed upon the man. And for them, there was a way to know whether someone was wife to someone else or you can take her. What was that? Because it was not virginity, because Sarah was no longer virgin. She'd been married to Abraham for years. Plus, she just went to Egypt and slept with the Pharaoh. So it was not that, because it was already wife. Now, to be wife meant more than just sexual intercourse or things of that nature. It was special. And it was so special that the Egyptians or our forefathers knew exactly what will happen to you when you take someone else's wife, knowingly that this one is meant to protect this other guy's purpose. And you can see whatever stereotype that may be upon us or upon people of African descent, it is not founded in facts, because, or it is just, it has evolved as a consequence of borrowing, I'll say, Thomas Sowell talks about redneck culture and incorporate it into our culture, which was something that they will do. So you can see now that this is part of our culture that we never knew about, that nobody will talk to us about. We will focus on what Abraham did and didn't do, but we don't look at how Africa has contributed to the building of Israel, as it was called for Joseph. Because when Pharaoh realized that he has been duped, he didn't do any harm to Abraham, because it meant to be cursed too. Let him go, and on top of that, blessed him, gave him maids, gave him what did he give him? It says here, and pray. That was very fair. The princesses show that, and he entreated Abraham well for her sake. And he had sheep, he had oxen, he had the asses, he had men servant, he had maid servants, and she asses and camels. So you can say that the first investment that the nation of Israel have gotten was from Africa. Our forefathers back then blessed Abraham with the first wealth that he could have gotten. And it is something to be proud of, rather than the belligerent attitude or atmosphere that is being created between the two races, so to speak. We can see that in a way they owe Africa a lot. And this is how we did it. We were the first a business angel to the Jewish nation. And nobody talks about that. This is us. This is our ancestor. And this is our culture. A culture that respected the rules of the game, because the game was that the woman will make that sexual selection and have society thrive through that natural selection, which is now sexual selection. And our culture was so powerful that we could foresee when these famines will come and it will not touch us. But today, you have a small war in Europe. It's not even unpredictable because we know Europeans like to fight. There is a war in Europe, and all of a sudden, there is famine in Africa. It used to be different. There would be famine everywhere else, but there would be food in Africa. And we've lost that. How did we lose that? Probably because we forgot our culture. And it was there. How did we lose that richness? How did we focus on begging and being the charity basket of the world, whereas we have everything? How did that happen? We don't read the Bible. It is in our Bible. It is right here. But we will go beg, stay in prayer chambers for nights and days begging, whereas our ancestors have had everything. Everybody wants grants for this project, for that project, for this project and that project. We have everything. That is not us. They've sold us an image of ourselves. That is not real. When we just have to remember, we have to read these scriptures carefully and get the true message, because this book was written not just for one kind of people, one nation. All of these things that made their way in the Bible existed prior to the Bible being alive. So that is the take for chapter 11, B, and 12. Now, I don't know if anybody will get to the end of this and then at least hear the plug about the webinar that we're having in next week. So the link is below. Register if you watch this till the end, and we'll see you there. For now, ciao, peace.